everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar of our Not a Partnership series, A New Paradigm of Marriage. Joining us today are the co-authors of the newly published Not a Partnership, Why We Keep Getting Marriage Wrong and How We Can Get It Right, and Dr. Alex Chris, our moderator, who joined us back in May for her webinar, Resiliency in Times of Uncertainty. My name is Brittany Sud, and I'm the chair of the JNF Future Webinar Committee and a JNF Future board member. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'll just briefly tell you about JNF and JNF Future. For decades, the Jewish National Fund of Canada has cared for the land of Israel. This mission took the role of planting trees, building water reservoirs, preserving natural habitats, and building parks and bicycle trails. Recently, JNF Canada has taken on projects to strengthen the social infrastructure within Israel. These projects benefit Israel's vulnerable populations. In other words, JNF Canada directs your donation dollars to where they're needed most. JNF Future is the young professionals group of JNF catering to the under 40 age group. We plan a variety of events throughout the year, with all proceeds going to a project in Israel. This year, the JNF Future Board chose Jaffa Daled After School Education and Enrichment Center in Tel Aviv, Israel. The center provides educational, nutritional, recreational, and therapeutic support to at-risk children and teenagers, 70% of whom are Ethiopian descent. While the center currently serves 30 children, there remains a critical need within the community to assist additional children and teenagers and their families. The neighborhood in which the center operates is one of the most deprived and poverty-stricken areas in Israel. To address these challenges, the money being raised from our events, such as today's webinar, will help to expand programs to help marginalized children and teenagers at Jaffa Daled to enjoy the full benefit of the Jaffa Daled enrichment programs. So for all of you joining us today, thank you for helping us and Jaffa Daled stay on track with the program expansion. Now on to our speakers. Tod Jacobs is a director of the David Robinson Institute for Jewish Heritage in Jerusalem, which he co-founded in 2005. Prior to his current role, teaching and counseling his students and alumni, he enjoyed a distinguished career on Wall Street as one of the leading authorities on the telecommunications industry globally. As a managing director at JP Morgan, and before that, a partner at Sanford C. Bernstein and Company, Tod acted as a frequent commentator on network television and in leading newspapers and magazines, and testified several times before the US Congress as an expert on telecom and media issues. Dr. Peter Lynn has served as Dean of Students at the David Robinson Institute for Jewish Heritage since its inception. He has an MA in Applied Positive Psychology and a Doctor of Psychology in Human and Organizational Psychology. Currently, Peter lectures at Touro College in Jerusalem, and he is also the founder and director of Greatness Within Seminars, where he helps empower individuals and organizations through the application of positive psychology. For today's webinar, I'll ask that you please keep your microphones muted and type all of your questions into the chat. Without further ado, let's hear all about A New Paradigm of Marriage.
Okay, should I jump in here? Alex, did you want to start, or you want me to give a little intro here?
Sure, go ahead. Why don't you give us an intro?
Okay, well, you know, I guess the first thing that many people ask us is, you know, what a couple of Orthodox rabbis who are, you know, basically teaching in a yeshiva and with backgrounds like ours, what are we doing hosting a seminar on marriage, and why did we write a book about marriage? And in that book, I mean, we also didn't write it as Rabbi Jacobs and Rabbi Lynn. We wrote it with, you know, our, you know, kind of born English names, so to speak, American names. And I think it's just worth maybe giving just a minute of background about why we got into this. As Brittany suggested, we have been working together, Peter and I, You can call him whatever you want. You call him Rabbi Lynn, you can call him Peter Lynn, but we have been working together in this endeavor, which is colloquially known as Machon Yaakov. It's an institute in Jerusalem for the past 16 years. And we did not put this place together. We did not create that institute in order to create an institute which is just focused on learning about marriage. It really is a place where people delve in depth into life's biggest questions. What is spirituality? How does it fit into my life? Right? How can I be a better person? Does Judaism have something to say to me? So that's kind of like our background is teaching classic Jewish sources, from mysticism to Talmud to Hebrew language to ethics and character development. But it turned out that along the way, what we found out was that, amongst our students, and I think we can safely say, without any fear of anybody contradicting it, our students are drawn from kind of best and brightest. They come from top universities around the world. They come from the most challenging industries that there are, from finance to medicine to technology to consulting to law to acting to you name it. And they tend to be highly accomplished people within the framework of academics and social and professional measures. And yet one of the things we found over the years was that they were basically clueless on one big area, and that is marriage and how to get into a marriage. And not only how to get into it, it's actually not so hard to get into a marriage. The question is how to stay in it. And if you stay in it, how do you stay in it happily? And we began devoting more and more resources to that subject over the years. And we tried to bring two angles to it. We tried to bring kind of classic Jewish sources, which again trace to mysticism, Talmud, midrashic material, things that are really going back, literally thousands of years. And then we always tried to always have in mind how modern research and modern ideas that come from, very interesting arenas like where Peter got his training in positive psychology, how that could, kind of bring out another aspect of the beauty of some of these very deep mystical ideas. And that was really that marriage of, no pun intended, that marriage of those two ideas, mysticism, classic sources on the one hand, and cutting edge research and ideas from positive psychology. We found that those two things really rang with our students. And when we picked our heads up after 15 years of helping train students in advance of marriage and then holding their hands through the process in the early years of marriage, in some cases now for more than a decade, we looked up and we saw, wow, the divorce rate amongst our students is about 1/10, that's 1/10, the divorce rate in the United States on average. The average divorce rate over time in the United States is 50%. And we found that our students had about a 5% divorce rate. So it's not perfect, but it was a whole lot better than obviously going into marriage without that training. And we thought, wow, we should really extract the ideas that are universal here and try and put them into a book. And that is how we came up with Not a Partnership and that whole project.
Okay, so thank you so much for the introduction, Dr.
Sure.
Jacobs. So I am in the middle of reading your book. I just got my hands on it a few days ago. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It is definitely super applicable to all of us. To be honest, this is the first book I've ever read on marriage. I haven't Googled how to make a marriage work because I'm not in a marriage. So some of you might be wondering, well, why is this girl moderating this? She's not even married. But I think for those of us who are on this call who aren't married, but who are looking to get into relationships and who are looking to get married, we're actually quite lucky to be learning about this beforehand. So I want to know, the first question I have for you, we might not have all read about how to make a marriage work, but we know that this focus on marriages is really at an all-time high in popular media. You state in your book that if you Google how to help marriage, you'll receive no fewer than 255 million results. So why do we need another book on marriage? And what makes your book different from what's already out there?
Okay, so I'll take a crack at that one here. There are tons of amazing marriage books out there that if I look at my bookshelf, I have so many of them and I've given so many out and just a lot of world-class, amazing advice out there. The way we look at our book is almost, if you were in college today, we would look at our book as kind of a prerequisite in some way to other marriage books. And what we deal with in our book is something that we didn't find the other books deal with. The other books give major ideas about skills, different tips, different tactics as far as how to tweak your marriage, how to build upon your marriage, how to fix a marriage, you name it. There's lots of amazing information out there. But what we found was that the fundamentals of what a marriage is about, we didn't find the books were dealing with these things. And if you don't have the fundamentals clear as far as what are you doing and why are we going for this, then none of the details help so much. And what we really dealt with in our book was two fundamental ideas, which is number one, let's define what this thing called marriage actually is, because it's not the same as a friendship. It's not the same as a regular partnership. And number two, what's the PDF manual of how to actually make this thing called a marriage work? And so what we saw our book as being is really a prerequisite to all these other books. And that's why we felt the need to put this book out there. So if, in a nutshell, that's a bit of my answer to you.
Okay. So you said, let's define what marriage is. It's not a partnership. So when I first picked up the book, read the title, not a partnership, like, huh? I would have thought marriage was a partnership. So how do you explain your title?
Okay, so the spoiler alert is that really properly done, it's the greatest partnership on earth.
Okay.
But improperly done, it works like most other partnerships work, and most other partnerships are actually very, very unsuccessful. If you look at data like as a business analyst as opposed to a marital, analyst or educator, what you find in the world of business is that there are lots and lots of partnerships formed every single year. Between people who may have phenomenal ideas, a lot of talent, financing, great product, everything else. And what you typically find is that almost all partnerships fail. And the reason that they fail is not the reason that you would think that they fail. You would think they fail because, well, they just didn't have enough money to pull it off, or the product just failed, or something like that. What you typically find is, no, it failed in the relationship between the two partners, and therefore they broke up. And the failure tends to be the following paradigm. A partnership is, I have my rights and my responsibilities, and you have your rights and your responsibilities. And as long as I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, then I spend the rest of my time looking at you and criticizing you for what I'm expecting you to do and what you're not doing. And there are very few happy partners who feel that their partner is putting in like everything they're supposed to be. So I typically look at myself as, I'm doing great and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but all the things that you owe me in this partnership, you're not doing. That is a recipe for disaster in most business partnerships, because it just turns into resentment, recriminations, and a lot of great business ideas break up because the people can't work together and they can't respect each other enough. And to the contrary, they're just constantly looking at each other and criticizing each other. So many people, unfortunately, enter marriage with a similar idea. How many people have we spoken to who, when there's something going on in the marriage and it's a little bit negative, usually what they describe is, I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and she doesn't do anything. She doesn't get out of bed, and she doesn't work the way she's supposed to, and she doesn't make me dinner the way she's supposed to, and she says, here I am making dinner, and I'm working myself to the bone, and I'm working a job, and I'm taking care of the kids, and what's he doing? He's not doing the dishes, and he's not doing this, and we're, instead of looking at what we bring to the table and how I can give my spouse more of what they need and want and make them a happier person, the center of my concern, which, by the way, normally normally generates the spouse doing the same for me. Instead, it's just the bitterness and the criticisms and the demands. And once the demands begin, we start making demands on each other. And that's usually the end of our happiness. It's usually actually the happiness, as one great rabbi said, is this, the moment you begin making demands on each other, your happiness has already departed. You just didn't realize it. And so therefore, if you approach marriage like a normal partnership, it's almost bound to fail if you approach it with a different set of paradigms, expectations, and desire to give. Then we believe that you almost can't fail.
Okay. So I do want to get into those three paradigms that you talk about, but I am curious, before we get there, how do you define marriage? So you've said what marriage is not. What is marriage? And you talk about this within the first few pages of your book. You're sitting down in a coffee shop with a student, and the first goal is actually defining what marriage is. And I think a big problem is that most of us in our generation don't have a good understanding of what marriage is because of what we see in social media, because of what we see in movies and television. We have very unrealistic ideas of what marriage is, which is probably preventing many of us from finding a partner in the first place. So tell us, what is marriage? And then we'll get into those three paradigms.
I'm going to just throw this to Peter, because this is really the first of the three paradigms, is trying to figure out what marriage is. And Peter, I think, has a great way to describe that.
I'll tell you that, and this actually leads into, as you mentioned before, there are three major paradigms of marriage that we discussed in the book. So let me just wrap up here the first paradigm as far as defining what a marriage is. Well, Tod described what a marriage is not. And what a marriage is when you have two people that are totally committed to the well-being of another person. My job in my marriage, okay, with my wife, I've been married to for many years, is my job is I look at her and I am totally focused on what can I give her, what can I do for her, what can I create for her so that she can have the life that she dreamed of, and she can have a life of true well-being. And I am totally focused on that. And I'm committed to that. When you stand under the marriage canopy, I don't care what race or religion you are a part of, when you say I do, what you are saying I do to is you're saying I do to that commitment through thick and thin. And when you have one spouse doing that in one direction, and the other spouse with that same paradigm looking at you in the same way with the same commitment, that's called the definition of a marriage. Now, while friendships are important and partnerships are important and everything, if you don't get the clear definition of what a marriage is, then you're going to walk into it in totally the wrong way, and you'll be disappointed very, very fast. Mm-hmm. So that really is our kind of first paradigm as far as what is a marriage? How do we define it? That's the way we define it.
Okay. So focusing on the well-being of the other.
And that really leads into our second paradigm, and I'll kind of introduce it a little bit here. But like you said, we live in a world today of social media, and we live in the world of Hollywood. And what happens a lot of times is, in the world of social media, you're seeing the best of people's lives. You scroll through Instagram, you're seeing, the greatest moments of every couple. You go watch any movie, you're seeing, romance set up in the most awesome way. And what happens is like this, is that one of the major fundamental problems that people don't realize when it comes to the world of marriage is that great marriages are built. They don't just happen. And one of the things that happens, and this is unfortunate, is many couples think that all of a sudden, as soon as they run into their first issue, well, hey, I guess it wasn't meant to be. Because if it was meant to be, it would be utopia. It would be the most amazing, perfect thing, and there would never be an argument, and there would never be an issue, and there would be just happily ever after. And the reality is, when you look at the world of Hollywood, you see that scene, guy meets girl and they ride off into the sunset. The way a real marriage works is that the next day when they wake up, that's when the marriage begins. And I'm going to turn to Tod right now to maybe give you a little bit of a deeper understanding of how this idea works as far as, moments of initial inspiration and how that really kind of is unfortunate, quite superficial, because where real greatness comes from is when people actually proactively try and build things.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a very, very deep idea that comes out of Jewish mysticism, and that is that, excuse me, that everything in reality comes in two phases. There is an initial phase where there is a creation of a possibility for something to exist, and it's a flash of light from another place, which creates and opens up a space for that particular thing to exist in its perfect form. It's extremely bright. It's extremely inspiring. It's extremely, I'll say it abstractly first, then I'll give you an example outside of marriage and we'll talk about marriage. Okay, but it's an extremely inspiring moment of perfection. It flashes for a moment, almost like the flash of lightning when you're lost in the forest, and it lights everything up, and then it's gone. But on the other hand, it gave you a vision of something in its perfect form, that now that you have that vision, you can begin the hard work of now trying to put that back together and ultimately reach, in reality, with hard work and with commitment, something which you were given for free the first time around. Okay, that's the abstract concept. A classic example outside of would be adulthood and childhood. Childhood comes first. What's childhood? Childhood is this incredibly exciting, this very short-lived period, by the way, over the course of a whole life, right? But it's exciting. A child has a feeling they could be anything, right? And what's amazing about every child is, that today she's a ballerina and tomorrow she's a policewoman, and today he's an astronaut and tomorrow he's a professional athlete, and and everything is constantly, a new vision of like some perfect thing I can be. And the beauty and the inspiration of childhood is that you can be anything. But the pain and the suffering and the reality of childhood is that you're really nothing. Adulthood is the exact opposite. Anybody who's lived into adulthood, okay, knows that all those things I thought I could be, I really can't be most of those things. And to the contrary, if I don't cut away all of those things and try to just be one thing, I will almost doubtlessly fail to be anything. Okay, so adulthood is that painful process of cutting away all the possibilities that are not real and then fully committing myself to one of those possibilities so that I can actually become a something. Okay, and by the way, living into the age of your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s does not mean you are not still emotionally behaving as a child. Okay, it tends to be a male thing. I hopefully not offending anybody, but men can often remain children long into their 50s and 60s and whatever it is, which on the one hand is something lovable about many people. On the other hand, the guy who just can't decide, this woman, it can't be her because then I'm denying myself to that woman, and it can't be that woman because I'm denying myself to her, and I can't commit myself to this profession because, oh my gosh, I really still want to be an athlete, and I still want to be an actor, and I still want to be so there are people who function as children, but it becomes less and less charming as the years go on, and as a person literally just never becomes anything. So that's how it works in kind of an easy to spot area. In marriage, the way it works is that there's a phase one period of marriage, the inspiration phase. And that's the phase that we all know about. It's a phase we all read about growing up and saw in movies, and we see as Peter mentioned on Instagram and every place else. It's the romance phase. It's the phase where the music is playing and the sparks are going off and the fireworks are firing, and and you can't breathe, and oh my gosh, the intoxicating aspect of that romance period. But the problem is that when you expect that to be the stuff of marriage, you're in for a bitter awakening relatively quickly. And if you don't get a vision that whole phase is given as a freebie to get you involved with the person and give you a picture of what you can have with that person, that you then got to spend a lifetime working towards to make it real and to earn it. If you don't realize that, then what happens is you just keep making the same mistake over and over again. So there are people who are just junkies and addicted to phase one inspiration. I just need another inspiring experience. And every time I go from it was so inspiring to wow, she's not as cute as I thought. Oh, and he's not as charming as I thought. And oh, the morning light doesn't do such a great things for that person. Oh my gosh, I guess life tricked me again. I guess I got to go look someplace else. When, as Peter said, that's exactly the moment when that curtain goes down on the movie, and then it comes up on that next morning. That's exactly that's act two, scene one. That's exactly when the people have to say, okay, I'm going to give this all I got, and now I'm going to start working to make it real. And that is kind of the mystical, backdrop to understanding how romance needs to transition into marriage. And that's a very, very, we view that as a very critical aspect of how Peter described as marriages don't just happen, they are made.
Thank you. Everything you're saying definitely resonates with me as someone who has dated a lot and not until recently found my person. But to those in the audience, I do want to say, feel free to leave comments or ask questions, because we can get to your questions anytime, and we'll definitely have also a question period at the end. So just to summarize, so I know that the first paradigm is focusing on the well-being of the other individual. The second paradigm, is it that great marriages are built over time? Is that how you would summarize the second paradigm?
Correct. Yep, that's very reasonable.
Okay, and then the third paradigm.
So the third, yeah, you want to take it, Peter? Go ahead.
I'm gonna introduce it, and you can tell a story at this. You can. Okay. So I'll tell you. I'll introduce it here. So, like you're saying, these are the two paradigms. The third paradigm is, well, okay, great. So now I have, number one, I define what a marriage is. Number two, I told you it's going to take work to build it. Number three, okay, great. Now what do you do? Mm-hmm. Okay, like what's the what am I doing all day? Now, okay, I'm ready to go. You're bought in. You're ready to do it. But okay, so now what? Am I supposed to be? Who knows? So the answer is like this: the PDF manual of how to have this amazing marriage, where in the ideal world, your marriage should be getting better and better and better as the years go on. Couples who look back and say, wow, it was so amazing when we were younger together, and that is a missed opportunity. It should be that the older you get, the longer you're with each other, the richer that marriage gets. And the PDF manual, as far as how to get to this place, is through the world of giving. And through the world of giving means that when I invest my time, effort, and energy into someone, that's how I'm going to get closer to them. There's a famous question out there, which is, do you love someone and then you should give to them? Or do you give to them and then you come to love them? And the way Judaism deals with this question very clearly is that the way I come to love you is I'm going to give to you, I'm going to invest in you. And what has to be the forefront of your mind, what has to be probably the smallest PDF manual I've ever had in your life, because it's only one word, is that you have to know that the only way to get your marriage to be that amazing thing that all of us dream about, that all of us yearn for, there's never, ever, ever, and I don't have any data to back this up, but I can guarantee it. There's never been anyone who stood under the marriage canopy and said, well, I hope this is average. No one ever said, hey, let's just, we'll see what happens. Everyone at that moment dreams of this being the one and this being incredible. I have no data. A lot of my life is very data driven. This has no data behind it. But I'll probably put more money on this than a lot of the data that I've done researching. But what we have to realize, the way you're going to get there now is when you have two people that are committing their life to giving to one another. And when you give to the person, you come to invest in them. And then the more you invest in them, the more you come to love them. Love is not a reaction to something. It's not a result of something. It's a verb of how we get from point A to point B. I'm going to hand it over to Tod to tell you an amazing story, which we speak about in the book, but I'll let Tod tell it to you.
Yeah, this is true story, true crazy story from Wall Street days, and we do write about it in the book. There was a point at which I was working for J.P. Morgan at the time, and leading the team which did research in telecommunications, and we did a big joint piece of research with a famous global strategy company, management strategy company called McKinsey & Company. And we put together this big piece of research, and then we rented a private jet, and we literally took it out for 1 week, and we crisscrossed the country, taking it to their biggest clients and our biggest clients to deliver our research to them. So there were about 5 of us on this journey together, and on, kind of spending all day, all night, for a week together. We spent a lot of time together, and a lot of time, sitting on that jet, and kind of like relaxing and exhausted and talking about anything other than work. And we're sitting on this flight. I remember, like 4 nights in, late at night, flying from who knows where to who knows where. And there was a young analyst who had been married for about 2 years on our team from JP Morgan. And this guy, like sort of out of nowhere, started complaining about his marriage. And what did he say? He said, listen, I got married to this girl, and like, she was so great in the beginning. She really took care of me, and like, oh, the things she did for me, it was amazing. I really like, fell in love with her because she was like so awesome to me. She took care of, cooked and this and the other thing, and thought of me all the time. It was so nice to me and spoke to me so nicely. And he said, but I just noticed she just doesn't really do much for me anymore. And I think I'm just, I just don't think I love her anymore. I'm falling out of love with her because she stopped taking care of me. So, and kind of like, again, I think everybody but one person on that flight was married at some stage. And, kind of the heads are bobbing up and down. Yeah, it's too bad. She stopped, being so nice to you. I get it that you're falling out of love with her. I mean, she deserves it, So I turned to him and I said, your problem is you're walking around with the wrong paradigm for what makes love. You just don't understand at all where love comes from. So then that was like all the conversation stopped and every head turned. And I said, listen, there was a famous rabbi, happens to be the same rabbi that I mentioned before, Rabbi Dessler, that I put on the chat, who said that all love comes not from getting, but from giving, as Peter alluded to a moment ago. I said, you look at your wife and you say, what are you giving me? It's kind of like the old partnership argument, right? What are you giving me? What are you doing for me? If you would only give to me more, I would love you more. I said, you've got it exactly backwards. If you would think about your wife and what you can do for her, and how you can give to her, and how you can make her life better, and how you can call her 3 times a day and see how she's doing, and how you can send her flowers, and how you can, try to be sensitive to her needs and try to take care of things that she needs you to do. I said, I think you would find that the whole equation would flip, and you would actually fall madly in love with your wife. And everybody was kind of like, didn't know what to do with that. So, okay, one of those like uncomfortable silences. And the epilogue to the story was really amazing, because this guy came back to me about 2 months later at work one day in the middle of the day. And he said, I want to tell you something. He said, I thought about what you said up there on the plane. He said, and I decided I was going to try. He's an honest guy. He said, I decided I was going to try. He said, it's really working. He said, I'm like really feeling that I love my wife. He said, I've never done more for her than I'm doing right now. He said, and I'm feeling that I really, really love her. He said, like, remember to thank that rabbi for, he didn't know the rabbi had died, 80 years earlier, but, thank that rabbi for me, for that insight. And when I saw that, like, here's a guy, not Jewish, young, not religious, but just took a classic piece of wisdom that just so I don't know, I find it self-evidently true and deep. And he applied it in his relationship, and lo and behold, his marriage improved radically. I mean, like radically. It went from a guy who was contemplating divorce to a guy who felt like his love for his wife was growing, and it had taken place over a 2-month period of time. So that is kind of, the illumination of let's call it that third paradigm, which is that all love is based upon giving, and giving is going to be the centerpiece and needs to be the centerpiece of every mission statement for every spouse who is going into a relationship that they want to succeed.
Mhm. I loved this story when I read it. I know from my own research also on positive psychology, and I would say even more so from personal experience, when we give, when we volunteer, that enhances our well-being, our happiness. We feel so good about what we've done, and in turn we usually get back after we've given. So it's funny because it's so obvious, but I don't think this is the way we have necessarily been. This isn't the way that we automatically think, and that's why it's so important that we shift our paradigms to focus on what we can do and not so much on what the other can do, because once we start giving, we usually then see that they start giving as well.
Right.
So I see a question in the chat, so I'm going to go to that question. After that question, I want to talk about the 4 pillars of giving that you discuss in your book and some practical implications. I didn't say this earlier in the session, but the next webinar will focus on the how-tos and what can we do to improve our marriage and our relationships. But of course, we should focus a little bit on it today. But before we get there, let's go to Scott's question. Scott is asking, if the success of a marriage is built on continuously giving to the other individual, does that also mean that individuals need to be open to receiving, accepting, and being open to the other individual giving so much? What role does receiving play? Good question.
So,
Beautiful.
So I'll respond to Scott here, and Tod, if you have anything to add. I'll say 2 things. Number 1 is when we get married because we realize that we are incomplete without someone else. So for a person to go into marriage realizing that you are incomplete without someone else and then not be open to receiving is a paradox. It just doesn't work. So by the very nature of us going into a marriage, I think what we have to realize is the idea that we are not complete, and therefore we're looking to this person to help complete us, and therefore being open to receiving is a crucial thing. And it can be quite problematic if someone is not open to receiving. But the second point I think is, which is more important, is I think that people don't approach giving in a very sophisticated manner. And the way we kind of work is, hey, this is how I like to receive things. Well, it must be my spouse likes to receive things in the same way. And there's an amazing book called The 5 Love Languages, which we highly, highly, highly recommend. And that speaks about that people respond in different ways, whether it comes to, how they look at things in their emotional life, how they look at things in their physical life. And the important thing is to relate to people. And let's talk about our topic, to give to people in the way that it's good for them, not just in the way that it's good for me. My job in my marriage is to look at my wife and say, wow, this is how she likes receiving gifts. This is how she likes receiving compliments. This is how she likes me to give to her emotional world. And if you were to line up what works for her and works for me, those are 2 different worlds. But I walk around and I say, hey, this works for me. It's got to work for her. So I think that a lot of times I find the bigger problem that I usually see in couples is not that one couple one side isn't open to receiving, but I find that people don't think about this idea of giving in a very sophisticated manner. And when we start to think about giving in a different manner, and we start to make it much more individualized towards exactly what my spouse needs, I usually find the issue that Scott is describing goes away quite fast.
Yeah, I would maybe just add, one dimension to the idea of receiving. There are a couple of words, both in Hebrew, and I think this is one of those places where it translates well into English as well. In English, there's a word called receiving, and there's a word called taking. And both of those verbs involve my getting something from an other. So what's the difference between taking and receiving? So when you get into kind of the ethics of it and the morality of it, and the relationship aspects of it, what you see is that taking is something that is done by somebody who is selfish and who is really about themselves. And that people are about themselves. Takers are people who run through life just always looking out for number one and trying to get whatever they can from others. And again, the best way to get it is to get someone to give it to you willingly. You know, sometimes you got to con somebody into it. Sometimes you got to like force somebody into it. But all of those are really, really drawn from a very negative character trait, which is that it's selfishness at heart. Whereas receiving, being open to receiving from the other, can itself be a form of giving. If I allow my spouse to give to me, if they want to show love to me in some way, my spouse wants to show me love, wants to do something for me. If I can receive that and show appreciation for that and give my spouse an opportunity to grow through that process and be bigger in that process, and my spouse does the same for me, so the receiving is really a way of engendering more giving. And the receiving becomes literally a form of giving in itself. And so I happen to love the fact that in English, many times, you know, you have like these concepts that work in Hebrew, one versus the other, and they don't work and they don't translate in English. This one actually does. And I think that that's an important thing, Scott, just to keep in mind, that you definitely have to, it's a relationship where what you want is a virtuous cycle, where I give to my spouse gives to me, I give to my spouse gives to me. We both become bigger and bigger people through that process. And we both have much more to appreciate by virtue of how the other is investing in my well-being. And it's an incredible dynamic when it's receiving and not taking. But we all know the difference when my spouse is taking from me. That's a whole different dynamic, and it's extremely negative and based in a whole different universe of bad character traits.
I think
Does that answer your question? Does that answer your question, Scott? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Scott can respond in the chat. I think that's a fascinating answer, and it's so important that we show appreciation to others when they do for us. I'm seeing another question in the chat. So again, looking at the time, it's already 2:45, and I could totally keep this conversation going. So I'm thinking, why don't we, if you have questions, please put them in the chat so we can address them. Let's not wait until a question period, because we might not get there. So, and I do want to get into those 4 pillars of giving, but I do see one question here from Deborah Birnbaum, that is my mother. Are there any statistics on the success of arranged marriages versus Western romantic marriages? Question.
So I don't think we have any hard statistics on arranged marriages, but I'm assuming by arranged marriage we mean where it's kind of the meeting of the two people is part of a process. Let's be clear about one thing. Even the Orthodox world, I'm gonna do a carve out. The Hasidic world has its own kind of unique cultural norms in terms of marriage. The rest of the Orthodox world, let's be clear what the process of having a shadchanit matchmaker, right? You know, like they sang about in Fiddler on the Roof or whatever it was. Yeah. A matchmaker is not there to arrange a marriage. There is no such thing as an arranged marriage. There are arranged introductions. And the whole point of an arranged introduction is to try to eliminate people from meeting who could by normal understanding probably be destructive to each other. Okay, so the arranged marriage, you know, I don't know that these people are going to fall in love with each other, but I know, for example, that this guy has a certain set of character traits, which if he marries this kind of woman, it's going to be like this. So on the other hand, if he marries this kind of woman, it'll be more like that, or vice versa. And the traits, you know, it's all a question. It's very idiosyncratic. It's a question of figuring out what makes this person tick. What values do they want in a spouse? What kind of home do they want to create? How do they want to raise their children? If we can take people who just don't fit into that framework of what they're looking for and de-randomize the process of meeting, okay, then what happens is when they actually meet, they don't have to be, you know, they can focus on whether they like each other. as opposed to meeting at the laundromat or meeting across the room when, you know, the mirror ball's going and the music is thumping, and, you know, and he sees her across the room and her hair flows like this while she's dancing. And, you know, that's the girl for me. I mean, she might absolutely be the worst girl for me in the world, and I might be the absolute worst guy in the world for her. But when the physicality takes over before the brains have a chance to have any view to what's going on here, that is usually what leads to the 50% divorce rate that we have in America. All I can say is I know from, again, I grew up in a secular world, and then I got more involved in the traditional Jewish world only in my mid-20s. So I've kind of seen both worlds up close and lived in both worlds. I mean, I don't have statistics, but I would have to guess that the divorce rate amongst those people where there was some kind of intellectual process that began the introduction, as opposed to just how does she look, how does he look. I think that the divorce rate is dramatically lower in the Orthodox setting. Okay. Now, that's not to say there is no divorce and that it's not growing in the Orthodox world, but it's a fraction of the 50% rate that it is in the secular world. And by the way, the fact that 50% of marriages stay together does not mean that they're happy and flourishing and doing amazingly. The fact that, you know, I mean, what percent of marriages are described as sparkling of those 50% of marriages that stay together? I think that's a relatively small percentage as well, although obviously, you know, the statistics are much sketchier there.
Okay, thank you. So I have another question. It's come through anonymously. And before I get to the question, as I was preparing for today, I did my own little survey and was asking some people, well, what do you think is the key to success, to a successful marriage? And a few people came back to me and said, trust. And so a question has come through anonymously. When trust has been lost in a marriage, how can help be given when giving can be hard? And that's a tough one. I don't have an answer off the top of my head, but hopefully you do, because you're the experts.
Do you want to try that one?
I'll start off with something which I think is very important, and I'll hand over to Tod, is that there are times where trust is broken in a marriage where it's healthy and when it's unhealthy. And a lot of times very important to get professional help to find out that, is this a healthy relationship that I should pursue or not? And, you know, the idea of trust being broken, that can happen on many different levels. And there are many people who are fighting for relationships to continue where, you know what, it's not healthy for either spouse to be in that relationship. And unfortunately, there are too many people that don't fight for it to continue. And that's a real problem. And we live in a world where we think that, hey, it'll be better the second time. And if you look at a lot of the research, what you'll end up seeing as an overall rule is that what happens during your first marriage is usually going to happen during your second marriage, because the issue is not the marriage. The issue is what you bring to the table. So I think that's an important thing. I just want to just say beforehand that you know, sometimes you're dealing with situations where it is from a professional point, this is not a healthy relationship to be in, and you will keep getting hurt if you are around this person. And therefore, it's important sometimes to really check in with a professional who has the right credentials that can guide an individual once a real kind of breach of trust has happened. Is this a safe place to try and rebuild or not? So I just wanted to kind of put that out there first before I hand it over to Tod.
Yeah, I don't have a magic bullet or, you know, that much to add to it. I mean, you know, there are different ways that people break each other's trust. You know, obviously the most dramatic in marriage would be infidelity. Even with infidelity, you know, it's a funny thing, infidelity, because people could not have a physical relationship with another person and yet become intimate emotionally with another person, which may be just as devastating or more devastating than, let's say, somebody who slips up in a moment of, you know, in a crazed moment of insane passion. You know, he happens to be traveling and she's traveling, and, you know, that's also a breach of trust. But I'm not let's be clear, I'm not condoning any breach of trust. But somebody who, like, let's say, gets intimate emotionally in a business setting with another person who is not their spouse, may be actually breaching the relationship more or as much as that person who slipped up once in a moment of, insanity and had some fling that they 1 minute later they completely regret and wish they'd never done, and oh my God, how do I make up for this? So the breach of trust comes in many, many different forms, and sometimes it's more subtle, but it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to gain trust. It's a funny thing when people say, what's the key to marriage? And the answer is trust. Well, but we didn't ask the question, what creates trust? We're only asking, how do you fix it if you lose it? Well, what creates trust? I mean, and the answer is that the more you open up to me and the less I take advantage of you, and the more I can open up to you and you don't take advantage of me, and the more we invest in each other, and the more we show that we are willing to fight for the other, make the other the center of my concern, as opposed to just being worried about myself, that's something that builds over a long period of time. I think real trust takes a long time to build, till my wife really. I mean, I had an advisor right before I got married who told me an amazing thing. He happens to be a rabbi on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and he lived next door to me. And when I got married, he said, I want you to realize something. He said, your wife will, he said, I think you're going to be a good husband. I think you're going to be, caring for your wife. And I think you'll have, be light and in fun and whatever in the house. And I think that you're going to do all the things you're supposed to do to take care of her. He said, I really think you will. He said, but you have to realize that even if you do all those things, it will take at least a year until she believes that you love her. Now I thought, how crazy is that? I mean, I'm going to bring home flowers every Friday, and we're going to have date nights, and we're going to have fun together. And, I'm not going to go and party with my friends. I'm going to be with her. And, but what I saw actually really over time was that after we had been married for about a year, there was just a certain change in her that I saw finally trusted me. And finally I saw she could count on me at that point. And I have since told that to every young man that I know who I've counseled before they've gotten married, because we have a whole process of counseling guys before they get married. And I've told every single one of them, literally write down on a piece of paper, put it in your smartphone, and have it pop up every single day that says, my wife will not believe that I love her until October the 25th, 2021, if they're getting married today. And everybody is just as skeptical about that as I was when this rabbi mentioned that to me. And after a year, everybody comes back and says, that was so right. And so what I saw from that is that we live in a society where people get hurt a lot. A lot of people come to marriage having had failed relationships. There's a lot of scar tissue. There's a lot of pain back there. People have been traumatized by all kinds of things and they bring that to the relationship. And because of that, it's very hard to trust another person. It's just hard. It's hard in the best of circumstances. It's especially hard in our society, given the things that many people have been subjected to by the time they come to marriage. So it seems like it, I think it's a long answer to saying, I think trust takes a long time to build. And then you have to work extremely hard to protect it. Because once you abrogate that trust, once you betray that trust, all hell breaks loose. And it's very, very hard to regain that. If it took 1 year when they were both being really good spouses for each other, imagine what it would take if one of them really was, unfaithful to the other in some either emotional and or physical way. Very, very hard. And obviously that's when you have to hand it over to professionals, to therapists, to marriage counselors, etc., which is beyond marriage education and beyond a rabbi helping you.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so I see that we only have about 4 minutes left, and we didn't even have time to get to the 4 pillars of giving, but that's okay because we'll have our next session to dive into that. But I'm thinking to conclude, can you provide us with some practical recommendations that we can take away and implement based on the 4 pillars? So the 4 pillars are keeping the relationship fresh, feeling and showing gratitude, respect. And the fourth is it all depends on me. So some practical recommendations for those of us who are in relationships. That's my first question. And I'm also wondering if you can provide some recommendations to those who are dating, to those who are still looking for their soulmate, because there are some people on this call who are definitely looking to find the one. So what are some things that that they should think about?
So maybe I'll answer. Those are kind of two questions. So
Yeah.
I'll answer the second question. I'll let Todd answer the first question. Then we'll wrap it up here.
And don't worry if we go over 3 minutes.
Okay. When people ask me what the biggest problem is in marriages today, the answer I usually give to them is a lack of education. And if you look at all of, if you probably take all of the, the goals and the degrees that have been earned on this call, it's unbelievable. And if you look at our professional lives, we put so much time, effort, energy, and money in not only preparing for it. Okay, you do your undergraduate degree, your master's degree, your doctoral, and then you finally get the job. And then when you hit the job, you are nonstop trying to get this promotion, and you're taking this extra seminar, and you're learning this new skill. And we are, for the things that are really important in our life, we do a lot of work to get ready for them. And then once we're in them, we do a lot of work to advance ourselves. And when you ask people, what's the most important thing to you? Usually at the top of that list will be their marriage, okay? And one of the biggest problems that happens is you take really smart people, and when you ask them, okay, so if that's the most important thing to you, how much time have you put into learning about what a great marriage is beforehand? And then now actually once you're on the job, once you're married, how much time are you putting into, learning about how to make this marriage that much better? And where I feel there's a huge, huge gap is in the world of marriage education. And if people put just a small percentage of time, whether it's before marriage, learning, there are so many resources out there. There are webinars, there are podcasts, there are books, there are, you name it, out there to help a person understand more what a marriage is. And that those same resources are available before marriage and once you are married. So I really think that if anyone is looking to up their marriage or up the search process, the one of the keys of a great marriage or a great person who is searching for that marriage is to be involved in the world of marriage education. And I think that without that, it's a very, very difficult world that people are entering into. And I'll hand over to Todd.
Yeah, okay. So I think the question was, kind of what's one thing you can walk away with? I think it's a mindset change, which has very practical ramifications. It's kind of maybe the segue from the paradigms into what we're going to talk about when we do the second workshop. And Alex, you mentioned it as being one of the four pillars of giving. And we actually probably think of it as being the most fundamental of those four pillars. And the thing that if you can get this one into your brain and into your heart, you just almost can't fail. And this is whether you are approaching marriage. Obviously, the earlier you get this into your mind, the better. But it can also be the thing that changes your marriage, even if you're in a marriage or a relationship which is not humming along the way you think it should be. And that is that we call the chapter "It All Depends on Me." And the basis of that, or the basic idea in that, is that very frequently I sit like this, waiting for my spouse to make the move to kind of like make up from the fight, apologize from this, and in a bigger sense to like make things work again, and it gets a little bit back to the partnership thing. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm waiting for you to like really kind of like get into gear and do what you're supposed to do. What we have seen is that there's an incredible way to light a fire in a marriage, and that a positive fire. And that is to say, 1 second, I'm going to try to figure out what I am bringing to this marriage that is negative, that is toxic. And I'm going to start working on that, irrespective of whether my spouse is working on his or her issue. And by the way, if you don't know what your issue is, just ask your spouse, just in case. Most of us do know what our issue is. Most of us know, I have an anger problem. I wish I could control it. I just can't, and I'm able to control it at work. By the way, we all control these bad character traits at work. Otherwise we get fired. We control them to some extent in our friendships. Otherwise our friends leave us. But our spouses are kind of like stuck with us. And that's where we let our guard down. And that's where we tend to display some of our worst character traits. So if you don't know what it is, if you're that clueless about yourself, ask your spouse, like, if you could change one thing about me, but you have to let your spouse actually say it and then not get mad, right? If you could change one thing about me, what would it be? Or if you could have me change one thing about myself that I could start working on, what would it be? So 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be surprised. It's either going to be your anger, your selfishness, your pettiness, your greediness, whatever it's going to be. And if a person can identify just one thing that they're bringing to the marriage, which may be contributing to a negative dynamic, and say, forget about my spouse, I'm going to focus on this issue. I'm going to do some research on it. I may go to therapy for it. I'm going to try and figure out, which podcast can give me an insight into it. Whatever it's going to be, I'm going to work on this issue. That is one of those things that is an absolute Kickstarter for a new dynamic in a relationship. When my spouse sees that I'm really trying to better myself, not because I want to get a better job, not because I want to impress my boss, but because I want her to be happier, whoa, that drives an incredibly positive dynamic into place. 9 times out of 10, it may start with skepticism. They may think, what's he want from me? But if they see that you're sincere in it, usually what you'll find is that the spouse begins to say, well, I wonder what I'm bringing to the table here that might not be perfect. And then you get to, once again, you get into a positive, cycle, as opposed to the constant negative cycling that many people live with. So that's what, if there's anything to think about for the next few weeks till we have the next workshop, it's like, what trait do I want to fix? And how can I go slowly about fixing it? By the way, traits take a long time to fix. There are no quick fixes for a character trait, but the process begins with a few small steps and it builds from there.
That's really interesting. I just want to say I did get a message from Ruthie, the organizer, saying it's okay if we go past 3. So again, if you have any questions, send them in the chat. You can also send them to me privately, and they can be anonymous. I won't include your name. So while I wait for some more questions to come in, something that has come up to mind for me. So you've just suggested let's focus on ourselves and what we can maybe change within ourselves. What happens? So there was something very interesting in the book. I've always kind of wondered, like, if you are so happy and so madly in love when you get married, like, how can it go wrong? Like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. And you talk about in the book, a young couple, maybe they're struggling a little bit financially. The husband is at work all the time. The wife is taking care of the baby. She's cleaning the house. They have no time for each other. And then I was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, I get it. And I even understand it. I even get it within my own relationship now, where my partner goes to work. I'm at home during COVID. It's easy for me to clean while I'm on calls, when I'm not taking notes. So I can see how something like that is so possible. So in this case, what do you suggest? There were 2 things that really spoke to me, and I'd love if you can elaborate. Putting time in your calendar, because I always provide this recommendation in my own work. If you want to work out and exercise, don't say that you don't have the time. You have to literally schedule like you would schedule a meeting. So if you could touch on that. And I also loved your recommendation about saving money, but saving, we'll always find ways to spend on ourselves. The new iPhone, oh, I want to get a new couch. We'll find ways for that. How about saving that money and saying, what, I'm going to save it to spend on us, on our marriage. So I'd love if you could go a little bit into detail about that. And I see some other questions popping through privately.
Maybe I'll touch on the time thing, okay, which is so important. Unfortunately, what we think is that if the marriage is so amazing, if the marriage has, such energy to it, of course, we're always going to make time for each other, and we're always going to want to, break away for dinner, and we're always going to want to, take a walk together. And while that may be true, what ends up happening is people begin to see, wow, we're not doing that. And then they make the mistake and think, well, it must mean the relationship isn't so great. And the answer is, whoa, before you jump to serious conclusions here, you have to realize that people are so busy, especially in today's world. We are experts at being really busy. And what ends up happening is that I don't care how important it is to you, just like you said, and we all say this in every part of our professional life, if it's not there scheduled in, it won't happen. And one of the things that we speak about with in a lot of our marriage education, especially when we're dealing with newlyweds, is we speak about the importance of, let's say, a date night. Okay. A date night is something which is a part of your schedule. I don't care what's happening. I don't care if it's tax season. I don't care if there's a big deal going on. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You know, in your relationship that Tuesday night, we are off the hook. We are out of touch. No one can find us. And therefore, we're going to find 2 or 3 hours to get away for dinner, make a real effort for each other as far as look presentable, look nice, turn off our phones. And that's going to be put into your schedule. And therefore, when you're scheduling everything else during the week, you're going to work around that. And unfortunately, what happens a lot of times in life is that because we don't schedule things in, so many things that are so important to us never get the attention that they need. And this applies across the board. It applies to your marriage, applies to people dealing with children. Okay, you want to spend more time with this child, you want to make this project happen for your family. If it's not there scheduled in, then you'll find that what happens, even though the intentions are good, it doesn't work out. And therefore, going back to some practical advice, one of the things we'll speak about a lot next time is the idea of when a couple, I don't care whether you've married a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, you name it, doesn't matter. The list goes on, is that having a date night where once a week, this is our time set for each other. We have found that it's been one of the most successful pieces of advice for people to really keep their marriages fresh and to keep their marriages vibrant.
Great. Did you wanted to ask something from the chat? Alex?
Oh.
Yeah, so I've received a couple more private questions. I'm going to actually just combine them because they're sort of similar. So do any of and then after this, I think we'll conclude. So do any of your foundational principles change when a couple starts having children, or those children are at different milestones in their lives? And how do you account for the fact that our lives are longer than they were in the past? So a couple could be together for 80 years.
Look, children complicate things radically. They add stress. They add stress emotionally. They add stress financially. The older they get, the more complicated they get. I'm, certainly on what I'm seeing is the top row here of the administrators and the participants here. I think I'm the one who has the oldest children here. I have, a couple of married children and thank God, grandchildren, and they're really complicated, and you may have differing views on how to raise them, and you may have differing talents in terms of one of you may be very emotionally tuned into them, and one of you may be more intellectually interested in what they're doing, and it just complicates matters. So I will say this because in the work that we do at Machon Yaakov in Jerusalem, we are frequently asked, by these young students of ours most of whom are not married yet, and almost none of whom have children yet, and they always ask, like, what's the key to like raising good kids, for example, and we always give them one answer: a really healthy, happy marriage, a really happy home. If you have a happy home, then your child will be able to withstand and deal with almost everything out there, will not feel like they have to run away to other value systems and other things and other places, and will have a sense of security, which will ultimately wind up with a sense of confidence and things like that. Obviously, you need some level, but the point is, you don't have to be an expert in child raising who's read 15 books and has a PhD in child psychology. But if you can have a great marriage where the two of you show and model for your children what it means to be respectful, what it means to be loving, what it means to be caring, and have a light, fun atmosphere in the home. It's very, very hard to, for children to, I mean, it's hard not to raise good kids in an environment like that. And so yes, the short answer is yes, children complicate things radically. And the way to head that off is to put in the work into whatever stage you're in. If you're premarital, then start working on your character traits and your understanding of what a relationship should look like. If you're in the relationship already, start focusing on some of these fundamental paradigm shifts that we've spoken about, and then start implementing with the second half of the book, which we didn't really even talk about today, but all of those, kind of practical steps that you can take. And if you're into a marriage and you have kids, and it's just never too late to begin building, and giving to the other. It's just never too late to make the marriage better, to make the home happier. And I think that, that there's just, and by the way, if you do that, then you're the luckiest person in the world when you can be married for 60 years or 70 years. And I think, we heard about the story of your grandparents, who were in their 90s. And right when Alex told us a beautiful story before we got on today, which is that she spoke to her grandparents who, as they say, they're in their 90s and still married together. And when she asked them, what's the key to success? Guess what the answer was? It sounded a lot like the book, Not a Partnership. We try, focus on making the other person happy. And it doesn't have to be deep, deep things. It's like, as your grandmother said, have dinner on the table. If you would have asked him, he probably said, do nice things for her, take her out to eat, buy her a piece of jewelry, say a nice thing to her, on a regular basis. I mean, the marriages can get better and better and better. I had one rabbi who I was speaking to recently, who's a very, very wise person, who's in his 70s. And we were talking about the fact, he said a remarkable thing. He said, he was talking to me as though I've been married as long as he has. I've not been married as long as he has. But he said, our wives are more attractive to us now than when we met them, right? Now, objectively, by the way, my wife is, of course, much more attractive than she was even when I married her, when she was beautiful. Like, I put all the provisos in. But the point is that even when a person gets into their 50s and 60s and 70s, and they do not look objectively, I certainly don't look like whatever. I look like I had more hair and it was browner when I was, 25 years old than, close to 60. And the reality is, on the other hand, the investment in the well-being of the other, you remain attractive to each other, and you become more attractive to each other, and you become more attracted to each other, because it's not just based in what you saw when you were 20, it's based in a lifetime of investment, and it's based in understanding the person's character, and it's based in that trust that we have built hopefully over a period of years. So, longer is, obviously there's challenges of caring for the other person and health issues and things like that, but all things being equal, the more the merrier, if you put in the work.
I think that is a beautiful way to conclude. I know that my partner and I we're going to be reading your book and working on some of the activities that you recommend. So do you have any final recommendations, homework that you can provide to the rest of the audience to take away and to think about before our next session together?
So mine, I already said, it's, try to spend the next week thinking about what character trait you want to change before you get married, or that you think will help your marriage get back on track, and try to come up with a strategy to begin working on it. That would be what I would throw out there.
I think I would just go back to what I was saying before. If you can try and spend a little bit of time between, this session and the next one, engaging in a bit of marriage education, no matter what stage of the marriage process you're at, I think you'll see pretty drastic results in a short period of time.
Perfect. Well, thank you to both of you, Rabbi Lynn, Rabbi Jacobs. It's been wonderful chatting with you. I feel very fortunate that I was able to moderate this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Alex. Thank you, Ruki. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you. And before everyone goes, thank you so much, Alex, for moderating today. Todd and Peter, thank you so much for being with us. Anyone who has registered and didn't sign up for a book, we are putting in an order to Canada because it's not available hard copy yet in Canada, but we are doing that this week. So, you know, if you've changed your mind, you'd like to get the book before the next webinar, all the information will be sent via email, but you can just let us know and we're happy to make sure you get your copy for our next session on November 29th.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.